Good morning passengers, welcome to Martel Air. My name's Amanda and I'll be your pilot for today. We're just beginning boarding for flight number 1 from Canberra to Moruya, so grab your seats while I finish up the last steps of the pre-flight inspections of this Cessna Grand Caravan, the pride of the Martel Air fleet. Before engine start checklist. Pre-flight inspection complete. Parking brake handle set. Switches off. Ignition switch normal. Fuel tank selectors both on. Bleed air heat switch off. Power lever idle. Prop RPM lever max. Fuel condition lever cut off. Fuel shut-off knob on. Battery switch on. Cabin lights on. Cockpit lighting set. Wing flaps position up. No smoking lights on. Before engine start checklist complete. The weather today in Canberra is sunny and we'll be cruising at an altitude of 10,000 feet, flying over Bungendore and Braidwood and finally over Bateman's Bay as we come into Moruya. Your cabin crew today is me, and your emergency exits are located to the back of the cabin where you entered the plane. I also have a door up here by me, and if you see me leave, please follow me quickly. Our in-flight catering services are provided by our wonderful passengers, so I hope you pack something interesting. Engine start checklist. Battery switch on. Beacon light on. Avionics 1 on. Bus faults check. Emergency power lever normal. Inertial separator bypass. EIS readings loading. EIS readings check. Propeller area clear. Fuel boost switch on. Fuel boost on set. Fuel pressure low not shown. Fuel flow 0. Starter switch start. Ignition on check. Oil PSI check. NG climbing. NG stable. Fuel condition lever low idle. Fuel flow check. NG climbing. NG stable. Starter switch off. EIS readings check. Generator load check. Battery amps check. Fuel boost switch normal, not off, normal. Avionics 2 on. Nav lights on. We're now ready for departure, so please fasten your seatbelts and turn off your devices, apart from those used to watch this stream. Thank you for flying Martel Air. We hope you don't die. Before taxi checklist. Taxi lights on. Seatbelt lights on. Taxi clearance. Canberra ground, Martel 01, request taxi for departure to the east with information Yankee. Taxi 2 and hold short runway 35 via taxiway Charlie 4, Charlie, Bravo, Papa, Martel 01. Taxi clearance check, nav source, set, prop RPM minimum, fuel condition low idle, inertial separator bypass, parking brake off. Before taxi checklist complete. And let's see if we get that graphical glitch again. Canberra ground, holding short, runway 35 at Papa, Martel 01. Before checklist, parking brake set, altimeter QNH set, standby flight instruments check, fuel boost switch normal, fuel tank selectors both on, fuel quantity check, fuel shut off knob on, standby alt power switch on, anti-ice system not required in an Australian summer, inertial separator handle normal, autopilot, altitude is set, flight level change set for VX, heading, initial heading set to runway heading, bank mode engaged, transponder on alt, wing flaps position, takeoff position, takeoff clearance, Canberra Tower, Martel 01, holding short runway 35, ready for departure to the east. Cleared for takeoff, runway 35, Martel 01. Takeoff clearance check. Strobe lights on, landing lights on, seatbelt lights on, parking brake release, fuel condition high idle, prop RPM to max, before takeoff checklist complete. Set power for takeoff. Rotates. Flaps up. Engage autopilot. Continue for east departure. Continue for east departure, Martel 01. Helps if I actually switch the ATC radio on before trying to speak to them. Cruise climb checklist set. Flight level change speed for climb as we're clear of obstacles. Anti-ice system not required. Inertial separator normal. Prop RPM set. Power lever set for climb, fuel balance check, ITT check. And now we take to the skies above Canberra. If we look out to the left, you can see Lake Burley Griffin and Black Mountain Tower, also called Telstra Tower, just above the city centre there. It is called Telstra Tower by those who are corporate shells. Canberra Tower, Martel 01, frequency change. Canberra approach, Martel 01 is type Cessna Caravan, 3 miles north of Canberra, 4,500 feet, climax 10,000, request clearance to transition up Charlie airspace. Squawk 4767, Martel 01. Cleared through Charlie airspace, Martel 01. And now navigation for first waypoint at Bungendore. And as you can see, the weather is nice and clear here at Canberra today. This simulator is running with live weather, so this is exactly how it is above me at the moment. And you can see in the distance there Lake George, which is shown here full of water, which is an interesting and unusual situation. Lake George is better known as a sheep paddock. Australians are just like that. So, since this is the first stream that I've done, a little bit of introductions. As I said, my name is Amanda. I am a computer programmer, Renaissance fencer, and many other things as well, because I am an all-around nerd, and I figured that adding game streaming to the mix would be fun. I seem to have one viewer in the chat and watching at the moment. Good start. That's not zero. And we'll see how this goes from here. So I will be doing flights around Australia, possibly working up some sort of path. There'll be a little bit of local commentary. There will be some connection lost messages from Microsoft Flight Sim occasionally, apparently, but it looks like we didn't get any drop frames from that, so I'm going to blame Microsoft for that one. So the flight we're doing today is from Canberra over Bungendore, Braidwood and Bateman's Bay to the town of Moruya on the New South Wales south coast. I chose this for the first flight because the drive of it is one of my favourites. Going down to the south coast for holidays. And to get there you have to drive through Bungendore, which is a nice little town, and Braidwood, which has an excellent bakery. And then Bateman's Bay, which is also another nice holiday spot, but as it's the one directly on the road from Canberra to the coast, it's the popular and crowded one, so I go to somewhere a little further along. I won't say exactly where because, you know, this is the internet and it's my personal life. And we are approaching our cruising altitude here, which is nice. So, cruise checklist. Seatbelt light off. Anti-ice system not required. Inertial separator handle normal. Prop RPM set. Power lever set. Fuel balance check. And temperature range check. And my first ever message into the chat, and it seems to be a bot looking thing offering to sell me some promotional work. That is one of the least tempting offers I've seen. But it's nice to know that I have at least some form of attention from the robot overlords. Now, one of the fun things about flying directly overhead of Bungendore is that you can see almost none of it. So I'm going to take us out of the autopilot and just have a bit of a look around and a tour. So there you can see along the left coast of Lake George the federal highway leading out of Canberra, and yes, it really does run between some fairly steep cliffs and a lake that is sometimes a lake and sometimes a sheep paddock. It is an odd little road to drive on, and it's one of the two major roads out. Luckily it's not the one that we're mimicking flying over today, because that's the one that takes you a little more to Sydney. And as we circle around, you can see Bungendore below us. It's a medium-small country town, but being less than an hour's drive from Canberra, they have a little bit more of an economy, just because you can live in Canberra or you can live in Bungendore and commute to Canberra. I suppose you could also live in Canberra and commute to Bungendore if you are living a really wild and weird lifestyle. But there we go, that is the lovely little town of Bungendore. Great to take a steam train ride out to in full steampunk outfits. Done that before, and honestly, a little bit tempting to do again. And the good thing about being under visual flight rules instead of the instrument flight rules of an airliner is that I can do this sort of little sightseeing thing, and it doesn't break any rules because I'm doing visual navigation and I just happened to make sure that I was spotting Bungendore correctly. And then we return to our path to Braidwood. So our plane today is the Cessna Grand Caravan EX, which is a fancier version of the Cessna Grand Caravan, which is a fancier version of the Cessna Caravan, non-Grand, non-EX. So this one is set up with seats for 8 passengers, which are currently invisible, presumably because I'm the only one with a camera on this stream. It would be weird if any of you had a camera going. And there's also an underslung cargo pod for all of your luggage, your snacks, and any contraband that I don't know about. These planes are used for all sorts of things, from small passenger flights to a lot of them are apparently owned by FedEx for the second to last leg into smaller places where it's quicker to take a plane, but it's not going to fit a 747 freighter. I have no idea how much rambling I will be doing. So we're currently cruising at 10,000 feet at about 130 knots indicated airspeed, which is what the instruments on the plane think. 155 knots true airspeed, which is what we're actually going through the air, and 186 knots ground speed because there's a 28 knot mostly tailwind. So planes rely on how fast they fly through the air, but how fast you get there relies on how fast you fly over the ground. So plane speeds are always a bit weird. And taking a bit of a look around again, we have I believe we're getting into southern tableland sort of territory. You can see that there's a few mountains around to our right, but in general it's all just very flat out this side. It can be interesting to drive through just because there's so much flat. It's flat and trees. Tune into 118.8 Martel 01, goodbye. Melbourne Centre, Martel 01, 10,000 feet. Hopefully the voice mod is working for the ATC calls. I'm going to assume that it is because I was testing it before, and if I forget to press that button, then oops, I guess I was doing that on the plane's internal intercom and the stream instead of to the air traffic control. Now, despite the fact that I am flying over New South Wales and nowhere near Melbourne, I was contacting Melbourne Centre there. That is because there are two air traffic control centres for major flight over Australia, and they are in Melbourne and Brisbane. There used to be one in Sydney as well, but they consolidated them. I can't remember exactly when they did that because I didn't think to get completely nerd-sniped by the history of things just yet, but I might look that up later. But it still hangs around in the fact that most airport names in Australia are the letter Y for Australia, and then either M or B for Melbourne or Brisbane air traffic control areas, but there's a whole bunch that are YS. So Canberra is YSCB, Sydney is YSSY. So they closed down the Sydney Control Centre and didn't change the names because that would be a lot of work. Just taking us slightly off course again so that we can get a good look at Braidwood as we come over it. Going to still be holding it at about 10,000 feet because that's a nice, comfortable sort of altitude. One thing that gets interesting with smaller turboprop planes like this, so it is a turboprop, not a piston engine despite the propeller, but one thing that gets interesting is that this plane is not pressurized, so if I go too far above about 12 to 14,000 feet, people start having a nap in the back, and that's not really ideal. General aviation planes like this are really meant to stay down where the air is breathable. And we can see over here we have the lovely little town of Braidwood. That one you take several sharp, like right angle turns through while staying on exactly the same street. It's still the same highway, it just happens to take some right angle turns to get through the town, which means that you're slowing down to go through the town, which is very useful for road safety. And the fact that one of the things on the town's main street that is also that highway is an exceptional bakery where there are pies and lamingtons and pasties, and when you're driving this route and it's taking you a few hours, it is a lovely midpoint to get out, stretch your legs, eat tasty baked goods, and possibly find a used bookshop, because used bookshops are great. And you can see in the distance it starts to get a little bit mountainy, but not up. The series of mountains that make this an interesting one to drive are coming up ahead of us. I'm going to get the map back to the topographic mode because that gives us some interesting stuff. And you can see that it all just starts to drop. And what that is going from these tablelands down to the coast. And it drops by about 2,000 feet. Which, it's an interesting drive. It can be a little bit perilous just because so the section of road is called the Clyde because it is this twisty little road that goes past the Clive Mountain and the Clive River. Clyde Mountain and Clyde River. It would help when streaming if I could actually speak. And I think I will actually take us down below the cloud cover for that. So let's try 7,600, purely because the minimum sector altitude or minimum safe altitude for the first half of this flight is 7,500, so not going too much below that. And we pull this back. Descent checklist, anti-ice system not required, inertial separator normal, altimeter QNH set, nav source set, landing lights on, and I am going to, just get us down below this cloud cover so we can see these lovely, complicated, fascinating mountains that are interesting to drive through. So if you were watching the news around the end of 2019, start of 2020, you'll recognise these forested mountains as being something that burnt down rather heavily, and it's looking like 7,600 is not going to get us below this cloud layer. So let's try 5,000 as we cross into the area where that's safe, because the ground's dropping away. And going through clouds is, of course, one of the most interesting and least interesting parts of flight, because you can look at all of these interesting water droplet structures and no terrain, which gets a little bit weird. And we're up to 2 viewers now, which is exciting because it's more than one, and in fact is more than the 0 that I was kind of expecting for the first stream. And now we can see we're getting into the... I think that is in fact the highway that I was just talking about. And you can see how it disappears into cloud, which is less useful for the demonstration. But it disappears into hills and lots of pretty well forested sort of territory. And this is where we get glad that I have good flying instruments, because going down into this cloud layer I can see approximately nothing. But we will need to be starting our descent anyway, because we are getting towards Bateman's Bay, which is the last stop and in fact the start of our descent into Moruya Airport, which is just to the south of it. And there we go, lovely view of... It is wonderfully crinkly and not at all glorious to drive. I mean, the Clyde highway, the section of the highway that is down the Clyde or up the Clyde, depending on if you're going to or from the coast, is a favourite among certain types of car people, because it's so complicated and twisty to drive, and car people like that sort of thing. I am not one of those people. I consider the Clyde to be a thing that you get through, and when I'm driving it, I have a no talking rule in the car, because I need to concentrate on controlling the car and not hitting anything. And as you can see, there's a fair amount of drive to do on that twisty little section. And it's all this sort of crinkly. It's beautiful landscape, just I'm glad at this point to be above it and not on it. I mean, I'm especially glad to be not on it when I'm in a plane, because this thing's wings are too wide for any of the roads through there. And as an interesting little tourist fact, one of the tightest corners on that road is called Pooh's Corner or Pooh Bear's Corner, and there is a cave there which is currently filled with toys and other tributes to Pooh Bear. And during World War II, it was filled with explosives, so that if the Japanese landed anywhere along this coast, we could explode the road and bring the mountain down on what is essentially the only major road into Canberra for about 100 kilometres either side at least. If they were going to come via the more northern road, they'd be coming through Sydney, and we've got other problems. And we can see there the Pacific Ocean and the town of Bateman's Bay, and you can see why people coming from Canberra will often just stop at Bateman's Bay. So wonderful tourist economy there, because You just get to the coast and stop, and they've got some lovely beaches. And a very controversial new bridge that I find a great improvement over the old one, because the old one was terrible. But other people find it less ideal because they are more sentimental than practical. I'm sure I've just sassed several of my friends right now. But I will show you that in more detail as we get closer. No, that's not the approach that I wanted it to load. That's a weird approach. Getting the flight computer to load the most sensible ways to approach the airport is always a little bit of fun, and it gets me distracted from rambling about whatever is coming to my mind. And as we gaze out over the southern Pacific Ocean, you can see a great expanse of nothing but water. If we fly far enough in that direction, we would possibly reach New Zealand, although depending on the exact direction we're flying, we would also quite possibly miss completely. And the more fun thing is that in this plane, we would actually struggle to make it all the way across to New Zealand, because it's actually a fairly long way. At some point I may do a flight to New Zealand. It will involve landing on Lord Howe Island halfway across to refuel, and that will be quite a long stream, so that one's going to be saved for either I have nothing to do for the next 12 hours, or possibly some sort of celebratory stream event. I don't quite know which it would be. But as we come over Bateman's Bay here, I'm going to take us off the automatic navigation again, if it will respond to me hitting that button. Thank you. And we can have a little look at Bateman's Bay as well. And of course we're now at 3,500 feet. Aviation being what it is, everything is in American units, or almost everything. Temperatures aren't, luckily. And so here we can see the new bridge and the shadow of the old bridge, which was there for quite a while. So the old bridge was one of those fascinating mechanical lift bridges where every so often you would have to stop the traffic completely, lift up a section and let a boat through. It was a giant metal cage that looked remarkably industrial and was horrendous. I hated the thing. And the new bridge there has the incredible technology of being tall. So you can see they've had to pick a different approach path, which means that the navigation to get into the supermarket right on the other side there, so what is currently our left, is a little more interesting now. But the wonderful thing about the Bateman's Bay supermarkets and also Bateman's Bay Macca's is that after you've managed the Clyde, and you can see those lovely crinkly hills there, you can get out of the car, stretch your legs and decompress a little. And as we continue round, we see more lovely flammable Australian forest, trying not to set fire to it. And as we come through, we get the highway. And also, I think that large cleared strip is for power lines rather than the highway. The highway has trees much closer. And there's also a golf course because, you know, crimes against nature are ever so popular. And now we are pretty much lined up to get to Moruya. In fact, we can just see the landing strip ahead of us. So, let's get the autopilot back on. Approach checklist. Seatbelt lights on. Fuel tank selectors both on. Fuel condition lever high idle. Prop RPM lever to max. Flaps to approach position. Landing lights on. Inertial separator to bypass. And brakes off. Attention passengers, we're now approaching Moruya and I've switched on the seatbelt lights, which means I'd like you to fasten your seatbelts. Enjoy this riddle and more as we come in towards landing, and thank you again for flying Martel Air. We hope you don't die. Traffic, Martel 01, 9 miles north, 3,500 feet, inbound to land, runway 18. And now we begin our approach. And of course the temptation when coming into land is always to keep your head on the instruments because that's what's telling you everything, but at a certain point you do actually need to look at where the runway is and what's around you. This is always a great challenge. So it looks like we have a bit of a tailwind coming in, which is going to make this more interesting, and if it gets too spicy then we'll just come around from the other side. So Moruya is a much smaller airport. You might have noticed that I didn't have to ask anybody for permission to land there. I just stated my intentions because this one just has a traffic channel rather than anything in the way of traffic controllers, and the onus is on people flying in and out of it to listen to each other when they say where they are and not hit each other. And we've now captured the glide slope. There we go. We are now on approach. And we zoom the map in a little. Moruya traffic, Martel 01 is on final runway 18 to land. Final checklist. Seatbelt lights on. Flaps to land. Airspeed under control. And autopilot off. One of the great things about Moruya Airport is that the trees just off the northern end of this south-facing runway are a little high and a little spicy. But that's fine. And also, that wind is fun. So, you know, you don't point at the runway just because you want to go to the runway. Aiming for the 1,000-foot touchdown marks and not the numbers, because those are, 1, the point you're meant to aim, and 2, further from those damn trees. Yes, these trees. What fun, what fun. I somehow imagine that the real Moruya Airport has trimmed those a little. And flaps up. Flaps up, anti-ice off, standby alt power off, strobe lights, it always helps if I'm using the same hand for switches, strobe lights off, landing lights off. The end of the runway. And we depart the runway. Moruya traffic, Martel 01 is clear of the runway. And now, where do we want to park? Oh, I think those guys want us to park just there. And there's another little collection lost message briefly. That's going to be partly the weather feed and partly the traffic feed, because I also have live traffic set. There we go. So, parking brake set. Attention passengers, this now concludes our flight from Canberra to Moruya, and we here at Martel Air hope you've enjoyed your time in our tiny sky bus. Please wait until I've opened the door and you can calmly deplane in an orderly fashion. Our baggage handling services today will be provided by our wonderful passengers, so thank you for not leaving any of your luggage behind. Any personal belongings left behind as you leave the plane will be assumed to be a present to the pilot and enjoyed thoroughly. Thank you for flying Martel Air. We hope you don't die. Shutdown checklist. Parking brake set. Power lever idle. Bleed air heat switch off. Temperature range stable. Prop RPM feather. Fuel condition lever cut. Inertial separator handle normal. Lights off. NG 0 check. Avionics 2 off. Avionics 1 off. Battery off. And fuel tank selectors both off. So that brings us to the end of this first stream and first flight. I hope you've enjoyed this flight and my incoherent or possibly coherent ramblings, and I look forward to seeing you at the next stream.